I'm Louis Moroni, and this is Constraints the Podcast from Hi-Fi Handiwork, a 20-episode series. Each episode is a chat with a guest from a creative industry about a project obstacle they've experienced, viewed through the lens of project management's three constraints of scope, time, and budget. Further insights and commentary can be found in the show notes. We hope you enjoy the program. One of the goals here on Constraints has been to stretch the definition of creative industries to include professions and activities one wouldn't instinctively think of. At its core, a creative industry invents new products, processes, or services, which, as an aside, makes it project-based. Being an industry, the intent is inherently economic. A marketing company creates a new ad campaign for a client who pays for the service. A musician writes a record. A musician writes and records a new song with the hope of attracting fans willing to pay to see them play. Oftentimes, the economic relationship is functional. A research and development department for a toy company may develop a new toy, but that toy is then mass-produced by the production department using assembly lines. Still, the economics of the relationship between the R&D department and the production department are pretty clear. But what about some less clear relationships? Take protest, for example. The act of organizing, implementing, and participating in a protest is a creative act. In this case, inventing new processes and approaches for showing dissatisfaction with a government policy or action in ways that cannot be ignored. Not unlike a marketing campaign. But who owns such a creative industry? And who is the client in the scenario of the protest? And then, what is the economic relationship? I have my ideas, and I suspect my guest today will have his. Like me, he is pursuing a master's in communication and culture at Toronto Metropolitan University. He's also no stranger to campaigns and tending to show dissatisfaction with governments. As a student in social science at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, he witnessed firsthand the umbrella movement protests of 2019. Passionate about equality and justice, he also interned at the NGO Help for Domestic Workers, a nonprofit organization supporting and empowering migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong. I think it is safe to say that he is an agent for change, and I'm curious and excited to see what changes might come to this podcast as a result of our conversation. So, Edison Chung, I'd like to welcome you to Constraints.
Thank you, Louis. I wouldn't call myself an agent of change, but thank you for your kind introduction.
Well, I was wondering how you think about how I described you, but before we get into that, the purpose of this podcast is to explore obstacles within the context of a project you might have been involved in. And did you have any ideas coming into this show?
I would say I'm a participant of change. I'm very much a person who likes to get involved and build connections with people, and I felt like that was the biggest thing I took away from Hong Kong movements, especially with a lot of people in my age group, my peers, my friends, who were, growing up in Hong Kong. We always thought we just do good in school, find a job, and life is going to be forever stable, and it's kind of like a fairy tale. But that really didn't happen when first it was in 2014 when we had the umbrella movement, but I was a kid still back then. But then in 2019, something more personal came out when I was just in freshman year, and I realized that sort of fairy tale couldn't really happen. Lots of things are beyond our control, and being so young and with people who think similarly and very much concerned of our future under very much significant political changes, we felt like we were at that point. We felt like we were kind of like a chosen generation. I know it sounds very corny, but we felt like we were that generation that needed to be active and be vocal about what we want and what we hope to see for our generation and the next one as well.
So backing up a little bit because first of all, I described the umbrella movement as 2019, but actually 2014 is where you're placing it. Um, so can you just describe the difference between those? And also, I think it's fair to say that this fantasy or fairy tale that you had in your mind of what it means to go through life was actually the case for generations before you, before I guess the handover. What was the year of the handover?
That was 1997.
Oh wow, that's so long ago.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
1997 from Britain to China,
yep.
and then I suppose from 1997 to 2014 was the transition period from, hey, maybe things are going to be the same, to realizing that things were actually going to change.
Yeah, so is Hong Kong is a very interesting place in terms of history. As in Hong Kong never really has a history beside of its colonial history. So we've been reading a lot about Hong Kong identity and been watching a lot of Hong Kong cinema from Wong Kar-wai, and he basically talks about how as people from Hong Kong, we don't necessarily know our history. We build our history upon disappearance. So we started formulating an identity of being in Hong Kong when the UK announced that we'll be handing you back over to China. And we feared this disappearance. We know that Hong Kong is a special place where East meets West, yada yada, all that stuff. But we never really realized how precious this was until it was going to be taken away from us. And then during the 80s and 90s, this Hong Kong identity really started to pop out, as in it was in the discourse where Hong Kong people realized that we need to take what's been given to us, whether it's our colonial history and our ties with China, our history, if you will, and into something that can represent us. And year 1997 was when Hong Kong, as you said, we were handed back over to China. But even then, we were still Hong Kong was still at that time very much ahead of China. Like it was kind of like this metaphor I heard that like China was handed like this futuristic toy and didn't know what to do with it at that point. But things changed when in 2003 when we had SARS, which was coronavirus number one, the original one, I suppose.
I recall.
Yeah, so that the economy took a huge hit in Hong Kong. So we asked China for help. Basically, we had this. I forgot the name of the scheme, though. I really should know this, but and it was like bringing in a lot of Chinese tourists. So that integration into the Chinese economy really began or took shape in 2003, and after that, China, of course, took off, as we all know, and they felt like they could exert more influence into Hong Kong's politics, try to bring it within the scraps. A lot of things have happened. SARS. And then I think it was 2011, we had there was this national education scandal or debate where we talked about the government was talking about initiating a national education program for kids. But of course, Hong Kongers were worried that it would be brainwashy type. And then came 2014, which was the umbrella movement. That was for universal suffrage. We wanted to vote our chief executive through universal suffrage, but the best China could offer was predetermined candidates, and you vote from these three.
Right.
So we wanted true universal suffrage. That was the umbrella movement.
And the umbrella movement, the reason it became the umbrella movement, I recall, is the umbrellas were used to protect the protesters from what was being shot at them, which was
tear gas, the usual rubber
right.
bullets,
tear
gas.
So this is interesting because leading up to the umbrella movement, we've described a changing economic relationship between China and Hong Kong, which actually, with the course we're in together is political economy. So maybe we can get some essay ideas out of this. But
absolutely, it's ripe with ideas there.
But so, in my intro, I was kind of musing about the idea of protest being a creative industry because it's, akin to a marketing campaign in the sense that you are creating this product which is unifying people. And you talked about communication as well. And and I sort of asked, who's the client here? Where's the economic relationship? But it's interesting because you have China, which essentially, I guess we can say, owns Hong Kong. Is that the correct way to put it? So China now owns Hong Kong. The constituents within Hong Kong have an investment in the culture and have an expectation as to how their lives should be. So this notion of protesting the government and showing dissatisfaction in the form of these protests, which we can continue to use the analogy of the marketing campaign. Um, I guess the clients here for the marketing campaign are the constituents because they want to endorse this change, and I guess the activists are the creative industry. And so what does that look like? How was like what does the organization? And I know you weren't directly involved in the protests, but you were you were right there. So from your observation, who was the creative industry that was responsible for creating this campaign?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because 2014 was one campaign and 2019 was another, and they're very different because the path the umbrella movement went was very much a staged. It's like some there were people who were organizers. Um,
Hmm.
they're now in jail. Um,
Currently, as we speak.
Currently, as we speak, yes, unfortunately, they're in jail, but not for the umbrella movement though, for 2019. But yeah, so we had like this top-down kind of management. Okay, let's occupy Central, right? Let's occupy important areas of Hong Kong. So that was one mode of organizing, top-down. But 2019, following the unsuccessful umbrella movement, if like unsuccessful as in we didn't really get universal suffrage, but successful when we think of the unity it has brought to us, and like you said, like marketing, right?
Hmm.
Like the idea of the umbrella, like that symbol. It was originally called the Occupy movement, which is not unlike Occupy Wall Street and the Arab Spring and all those other movements, but it actually turned into the umbrella movement because we managed to use like the symbol of the umbrella, and through like discourses. And there was one politician who in one of the meetings with the Chinese government and authorities, he raised a yellow umbrella, and it just stood out, and this became this immortalized image of this very sharp yellow object amongst this like red background, right? So that's marketing to me,
Yeah, for
like
sure.
that, bringing that image and bringing people together. So we built on that in 2019, but we said, okay, let's not do this top down. That's what we call like a stageless operation. Like, let's all be very much more grassroots initiated, right? So, but still, how that worked out. So we use a lot of internet technologies like platforms, Hong Kong platforms, and organize from there. But the idea was very different, as in, let's not have like a central authority figure that would be top down managing the protest, but let's do it more organically, like from within ourselves.
There's a lot, like as you're talking, there's so much there because part of this makes me think about the Occupy movement in North America, where it was kind of the reverse, right? It started off as very, well, I don't even want to say started off, but I mean, we've had discussions even in class about what the value is of, I guess, in quotes, a failed movement like that. But one of the things that you get out of it is people have experience being involved in a movement like this. And so even from a project management perspective, it sounds like between 2014 and 2019 there were some lessons learned.
Absolutely.
And so we're gonna mount a new project, and what should we do differently that didn't work the first time? And of course you have all these people with the visceral experience of actually being engaged in those protests. um, so I think our analogy of the marketing campaign has actually been quite useful. Um, Now, as I'm talking, I should have made a note because I can't remember the other piece, but I'm sure it'll come back to me. But so you talked about communication, and also you were there for both. So walk me through a little bit about what your involvement or experiences or observations were, and also what you saw as the obstacles.
I was just a kid when 2014 happened. I wouldn't say I was involved in any sense of the word, but I felt like the city was in a state of huge change, which is interesting because Hong Kong has always been in a state of change. But I felt like even when I was in 2014, I was a kid and I didn't really get myself involved in in politics, if you will. But I knew that okay, Hong Kong to me has always been people fighting for their own and fighting on their own. Very individualistic. People were highly motivated, but not in a collective sense. But when the umbrella movement happened, I saw a sense of unity amongst Hong Kong people that I didn't really feel, or it wasn't really shown to me. That really changed how I saw the place growing up. I realized that um, at times of turmoil, Hong Kong people really can band together, and that brings me back to 2019 when um, more people got involved because they felt like Hong Kong has always had like more radical protesters, more localist. I don't know if it's the right word in English, but they really want Hong Kong to be on its own. Um, and versus there are other more less radical or more um, everyday people who want to maintain this way of living, who want to maintain this distinction between China and Hong Kong, but not necessarily have its own sovereignty. But what interested me was how 2019 managed to band together all these people. And it's like, let's put down the extreme. Let's not go to one extreme or the other. Right now, we have to be together, because, like I said, it was a stageless operation. So that communication between different parties had to be clear. Like, what's our objective here? Do we really want to push for something that we know we're not going to get, or do we just want to? Because 2019 was about getting the extradition bill withdrawn. At first, that was the original objective.
And explain the extradition bill.
So what happened was Hong Kong never had an extradition agreement with China, but we have extradition agreements with some other countries. But China saw that as like a legal loophole because they wanted to extradite prisoners to China. What struck this? I'm sorry, just recalling past events. But what brought this to attention was, I think a couple went to Taiwan and the boyfriend killed the girlfriend and went back to Hong Kong. And it's like, okay, well, we can't extradite him because there's no pre-existing agreement. Let's fix this legal loophole. Was the government's original motivation, and that turned into the extradition bill. And concerns were voiced over like, hey, are you sure you're not going to extradite political prisoners? And the government said, no, we never will. Like, But of course, there was this unease and uncertainty surrounding the bill, and we asked for it to be withdrawn. 2 million people, and 1 million people first, came out to protest. And then the government said, okay, never mind, screw you. Like 1 million people out of 8 million, that's nothing.
Oh, wow. And how did those 1 million people get out there?
It's just internet, like stand up for ourselves, because we have a history of protest.
Sure, but I think about China, and I think about the strong controls over, say, social media. Didn't bleed over into Hong Kong? How did you have that freedom within the social media?
Yeah, Hong Kong has always been different from China at this point in time. At this point in time, it still is quite different. As in, we don't need to use we don't need to go over the Great Firewall to access Western internet, Instagram, whatever, all those.
Is that still the case?
That is still the case.
Oh wow, I find that really actually quite interesting. I should probably know that, but it's so, and there's no termination point to China's ownership of Hong Kong at this point.
There is.
Disagreement
right now is what they call one country, two systems. So it's in the Sino Joint Declaration. It says that this one country, two systems will remain in place for 50 years. 50 years, nothing will change. It's the original agreement.
Right.
So it runs out in 2047.
Okay, I do recall that. And
Yeah.
then what happened? What's supposed to happen in 2047?
No one knows.
Okay,
No
all
one
right.
knows.
But there's no change in ownership at that point. It's
No.
still China.
It's still China. It's very much China. We're very much one country,
Uh-huh.
but it's going to be two systems. So a lot of the conflict comes from the interpretation of these two things.
Right, right.
Because it's a very fine line to walk.
Right.
At times.
So back to the million people, there was a shared vision that brought a million people out. A million, so 1/8 of the population, which China didn't think that was. I mean, take away, small children, like the actual population out of 8 million that could go out to protest is less than 8 million. So, but still, so a significant million people. China says, this isn't nothing.
Yeah, probably. I'm not sure if China explicitly said anything, but I know the chief executive said let's continue, carry on.
Right.
We're speculating whether she received orders. I'm saying, of course, like,
right. Okay.
Obviously she's just a puppet. Right?
Sure.
Carrie Lam, then the chief executive of Hong Kong. So yeah, they proceeded with pushing the bill through the Legislative Council, and that day, when the meeting was supposed to commence, protesters tried to surround the building, and that sparked off a police protester confrontation. And then in the next weekend, 2 million people came out on the streets. So a lot of people saw basically an injustice on the weekday before. So what's interesting, I find, is like that cohesiveness between some of the more radical, I don't say radical, but some of the more active protesters who went out to surround the electrical building on a weekday, and then on the weekend after that, we have like a lot of families, people who aren't necessarily going to be the ones to surround buildings and find themselves in confrontations with the police, and they wanted to come out and voice their opinion as well. So we have like these like parallel streams that occasionally come together, and I just found that very moving. Like,
I bet.
Yeah, because
and you were out there.
It's out of 2 million people. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I always said. I'm a participant of change. I wish I could be something more, but like the name of the podcast, like constraints. Like there's so many constraints being an only child and just going into school. There are huge legal repercussions. Plus, I'm not the fittest in shape. So
yeah, first of all, that's so real and true. And coming back to our treating the sort of the protesters as this marketing campaign, I'm sure millions of people had the constraint of the risk to their own, not just their own life and livelihood, but those people around them who either rely on them or love them. It's a very big decision to make. But at the same time, you have 2 million people come out. There's that strain. I mean, you can't arrest 2 million people. So really, I guess the ultimate goal in utilizing the shared vision is to get out as many people as you can. I mean, really, that is the campaign, right? You can't, there's nothing much more you can do than to show en masse the dissatisfaction of the people. And even though there is that risk, if people feel confident that other people are going to be joining them in this struggle or in this movement, then really, that's the challenge. The challenge is for people to have faith that they're going to be joined in unison.
Yeah, I feel like everyone knew that they could participate. In different ways. Of course, just being a protester, walking on the street, being part of the 2 million people already. You're part of a message, right? And even within that, we have more protesters who are more confrontational. And there are protesters who would like take more of a back seat, as in, okay, let's design some posters and stick them around, and let's be on like we divided ourselves into like different groups or like departments and like jobs basically. So, but then again, there wasn't a person who was hiring us. It was just what can we do on our own to our own abilities that could best serve the movement, right? So maybe some people would be on Twitter and try to engage with a Western audience. Like everyone knew that they could participate in some way. And
Right.
they found that way to
Because
participate.
of that shared vision, because there's everyone sort of knew what the goal was, and everyone did what they could
Yeah.
with their skills.
Yeah. I wish we like looking back, I feel like we were very much caught up in the heat of the emotions of things. Like back then, the objectives were very clear. Like
Uh-huh.
withdraw the bill, very tangible objective. Let's account for police brutality during the protest. Those are very clear events that can be clearly stated and taken. But then one of the bigger issue with Hong Kong, the underlying problem that has never been solved is how are you going to interpret one country, two systems? How are you ever going to find like a way that can satisfy both parties, right?
Hmm.
It's very difficult. And I think even within those 2 million people, we don't really have a clear idea of what that should look like. There are people who are more leaning towards Hong Kong independence. It's a very, very sensitive topic. That and then because of the sensitivity, people say let's not
That's
talk about that.
right.
Like that's not gonna get us anywhere.
Hmm.
So your idea of like a shared vision, yeah, I felt that during the protest, but I feel like more like shared emotions. Like we felt a sense of injustice that we wanted to correct. We wanted to because back then we one of us is bound to know another person who's been arrested. So there's a much more personal element to that. But now like 4 years have passed, 5 years actually. I can look back and see, well, wait, there are things that because it is such a stageless operation, our objectives we haven't really thought long term is what I felt like.
Right.
And of course, that has been disrupted by COVID-19. So the protests ended very, very abruptly because of COVID-19.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and
Oh,
the
that
government.
yeah, and so there's that, and then there's the structure. So we've had two different movements, completely different structures, and sounds like neither of them were quite right. But with some tweaking, maybe there's some hybrid of structures that I don't know if there's another movement on the horizon. People are older, and people this generation coming up have different experiences. Maybe they don't have the um, uh, what you had described as sort of the fairy tale vision of what their lives could be. I'm sure that governments think long term in that way, in the sense that, well, the next generation coming up won't have such extreme expectations, and uh, maybe that's one of their long term
That's
strategies.
certainly the plan.
Yeah.
It feels like Hong Kong is becoming more and more like China, and I don't want to say that necessarily is a bad thing.
Hmm.
What I know it is that we're going through another round of disappearance. The language, for example, is a huge one, like Cantonese, being the local dialect. But now on the streets, you're more likely than before to hear Mandarin. Kids nowadays they're speaking Mandarin in school. So yeah, just this erasure of a culture and like you said, like the next generation, right, is all what China cares about. How are we gonna assimilate the future of Hong Kong into it's being to be compatible with China?
Right.
So they're starting now, and they don't have to wait until 2047.
Well, this is fascinating, and of course we could start to conjecture and get down rabbit holes that we probably shouldn't even be talking about. Uh, it's interesting though. While we're recording this, uh, there's been news about protests happening in the states that are much smaller than I think people had anticipated or hoped, and also of an older demographic. Younger people aren't engaging or participating in some of the protests that were organized in the States. And so it's interesting to have this conversation about the unified vision that brought 2 million people out in Hong Kong versus sort of the underwhelming turnout at a time when many people feel like there should obviously be a shared vision, but it's not as clear. So it's interesting to observe.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're kind of winding down here. I'm very grateful that we had this conversation, because I do think that thinking of things like this in terms of being a creative industry maybe even provides a new perspective on it, maybe something that brings some value to it. There is something that I end my podcast with recently that will put you on the spot, unless you've been listening religiously. I'd like you to complete this sentence for me. Creativity is.
Yeah, you did put me on the spot here. I think creativity is connection in some sense. What you create, first of all, has to connect with yourself. It has to come from somewhere you know where it's coming from, and you're not just creating it to put something out there, but it's more like you want people to know something about you, about yourself. So you first have to know what that thing is in connection to yourself, and then you also have to manage to connect it with other people, and that's where part of the creativity comes in. Like, how am I going to make something I believe in get across to other people who might not see things the same way, but what are some similarities that we can tease out? Like, going back to 2019, not all of us wanted Hong Kong to be independent, because that would be a very sensitive topic. But what we all wanted is we wanted to keep our way of living. We wanted to maintain what makes Hong Kong special and unique. And I think from there, we just went from there. We wanted to hold on to something that Hong Kong police used to be Asia's finest, like, but now I don't want to say too much, but I think the quality has fallen off. But yeah, that's the point. Like, we want to keep something that we can call our own, and from there, yeah.
So right back to shared vision.
Yeah. But it's not easy nowadays, with so much, this like rupture in discourses.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy. I feel like Hong Kong's movement has suffered from the same thing, as in not to our own fault, because we don't have the space to deliberate on stuff and really get into the nitty-gritty of things, and not just be flashy with our protest, which is what internet language is. It's flashy, and it's so impermanent. Like, we're riding on emotions. But sometimes from this shared vision, like an emotional core, we need to take a step back and, see how this plays out in the long run.
Well, Edison Chung, you've given me a new perspective on the history and the future of Hong Kong, and I thank you for being on my podcast. Constraints the Podcast receives resource support from the Alan Slate Radio Institute at Toronto Metropolitan University and is co-produced by Louis Moroney and Mihir Corey. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts to automatically be notified when a new episode is posted. Also, follow us on Instagram at constraints_podcast. Constraints the Podcast is brought to you by Hi-Fi Handiwork. Sound advice.